Hello everyone, welcome to this little demonstration about how an organ works, and I'm sorry that Phil Scriven is not able to do this because, poor chap, he's injured his wrist, and I'm sure he'll have done a much better job than I'm about to do. Firstly, I'm going to have to say that this is on a Viscount digital organ, but you know what, it's okay, it sounds not bad, it does the job. Quite fond of it actually. And it does have enough of the sounds for me to be able to tell you all about it. So, what sort of sounds does an organ have? Well, it has, in a way, we have two areas really. The flutes or the flutes, which includes, of course, the main sounding diapason chorus, but we'll come to that. And then we have the reeds and other things. But let's go through the flutes firstly. You get all sorts of flutes, metal flutes, wooden flutes, which are often usually sort of square inside, some stopped at the top, some open so that all the sound comes through the mouth of the pipe. In a proper organ, if I can describe it like that, then the air would come through the chest and in through the pipe, achieving that wonderfully sort of open sound. It's a kind of, it's a singing instrument is the organ, in spite of what people think. So here's a little chimney flute. And then a stopped diapason. And then a lieblich gedacht, which lieblich, lovely, flute sound, which the great builder Henry Willis made very famous at the end of the 19th into the 20th century. Then you get, those are sort of singing sounds, very sweet sounds, aren't they? Sort of almost bird-like. You get 4-foot flutes. So what do you mean by 4-foot? That means an octave higher. You hear this added? That's the octave higher. And higher still, a 2-foot. Even higher. Cuckoo and the nightingale. And then you have the principal chorus, which that means what it says it means, which is principal main, as in the principal of a school or college. It's the main thing. So we have all sorts of principals. A smaller one on this manual, I'll come to the manuals in a moment. This is called a swell organ. And on the main organ, called the great organ, we have here on this one 3, 2 at 8-foot pitch, and another one. Add them together. And then we have those ranks which come from the principals, i.e. the 4-foots, the 2-foots and so on. So on the great here, those are the 2 principals called diapasons usually in our speak. The 4-foot, you hear an octave higher, 2-foot, and so on. On the main organ. If you listen to that on the smaller choir organ, but I'll come to these departments more specifically in a moment. And on the other manual, swell organ. So we'll come to what we call mutations in a moment, but we're going to just stick around the idea of listening to some 8-foot pitches now, which are the strings. And we've got 2 sets of strings on this organ. You have the gamba, stringy, you hear that, and the voix céleste, the celestial voice, is actually tuned slightly to beat against it, so you see how it works. Very beautiful sound. And then on the choir organ we have a celestial again, an 8-foot, and then another angelical voice, vox angelica, which is slightly flatter. Do you hear that? Slightly flatter. And under maris to go with it. Okay, that's all the strings we have on this organ. Sometimes you can have banks of strings in big organs, not on this one. Then mutations, what do we mean by that? Well, that means notes that are other than the principal notes you're playing. So, for instance, let's just hear what happens if I play an open C there. Then I go to a thing called a 12th, 2 2/3. So the pipe is that length. Now, analytically, that's basically an octave plus a fifth. So it's that note there. You think, oh, that sounds slightly strange, doesn't it? But as soon as you add a 4-foot to go with the 8-foot, the ear starts to change, and you think, it synthesizes what's going on. It's a good word that Phil used, I know, in his presentation for this, and I'm pinching. So on the choir, we could make an 8-foot, a 4-foot, a 2-foot, and then we're going to add a 12th and a 17th. Which are those notes up there? Do you hear that? But you've now stopped hearing all those little notes at the top. And that, if you add that as well, is a conne, particular composition of sounds. So then, of course, other sounds, mixtures, well, that is what it says it is, a mixture of different sounds at different pitches added to the main chorus we've talked about. So here's our principal chorus, remember? 8, 4, 2, 2 2/3, 12th. Then here's the first mixture. Do it adds brightness. You've got all these other sort of upper partials, very high, much higher sounding pipes. If you listen to the mixture, it sounds like, and it breaks back every so often because it will get too high. You see how it works? But you don't really hear all of those individual components, do you? So together it sounds like this. Now the one area I haven't talked about is the 16-foot. That is to say, it's an octave lower than, obviously, than 8-foot pitch. Goes an octave lower. So add that 4 and to the mixture. Your main chorus. So the size of instruments really varies hugely, and we have a 3-manual, that is to say 3 keyboards, which is called swell, which is under expression we call it, what is to say we can make it go softer and louder. And then you've got the idea, for instance, that you might want to make it sound like a sort of roaring of a lion or something. We call that full swell. It sounds like this. A lot of variance, isn't there? And also the idea that the swell is in a way a kind of accompanimental department. As I said earlier, the main organ is the great organ. And then you have the choir organ, which is much smaller scale. But on this instrument, as in a lot, you also have some solo sounds, a clarinet, and a tuba. It's not what you might imagine a tuba, sort of very low sounding tuba, but this is just kind of a big trumpety stop. Other reeds, you have on the great trumpets and clarions. And as I said earlier, on the swell, the same. And then of course you have the pedal organ, which ranges in 16-foot pitch. That, as I mentioned earlier, is obviously an octave below 8. You've got that, the softest sound, getting louder, with wood or metal pipes, adding 8s, and then a 32-foot, if you can hear it, goes much lower. The deepest sound on the organ is a 32-foot. Occasionally you'll get 64, but very occasionally. Then a mixture. Hear those other sounds come in there. Then the reeds, trombone, bassoon, trumpet, clarion, and a 32-foot, very low, very deep. So together, and then you have all these buttons, all these manner of things called pistons. That is to say, each, you can see lights going on, different combinations of the sounds. Now it's a little bit fake with lights, to be honest. These are called tabs. Normally you'd have stops that you pull out, sometimes a very long way if they're an old organ, but modern organs not so far. But these are the tabs. They're functional. Okay, good. I think I've probably covered most things, but just to say, you can, of course, you've got the pedals that supply a kind of deep bass sound to what goes on, and that is a technique all of its own to have to learn. All these different combinations, plus enormous numbers usually these days, are what we call general pistons. That is to say, you can see if I press 2, then I press 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, different lights are coming on. That is to say, different sounds emerging, and you set them and then you use them as you're playing. So I'm going to play to you 2 pieces, the Bach Fantasia in G, which is also known as pièce d'orgue, piece of organ music, which is the only one actually with a French instruction. So très vitement is what it begins with. That is to say, very fast, very fast. And then the middle section, grave, it's basically a grand gestural piece of, wonderful piece of Bach harmony. And then the last section is slightly misleading in its term, which is lentement, which of course means slowly. But that means the pulse is slow, not what you're doing, because what's above it is quite fast. second piece I'll play is Carillon de Westminster by Vierne, and it's really appropriate. I was very lucky to be a few years at the helm as organist at Westminster Cathedral, where Willis built the organ, and Vierne wrote this piece to mon ami, my friend, Henri Willis. And I think very much with the Willis organ in mind as he was writing it. So I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.